Hey, let me get you
Hey,
this music. All right. Hey, Damien, how's it going?
good man. Good to see you again, Cliff. It's
Good
going
to see
well.
you too. And let me just stop the screen share. There we go.
There you go.
All right. Well, welcome to Cliff Chats.
Thank you, brother.
And are you hearing that latency or is it just me?
Just you. Sounds good on my end.
Okay. Hold on a second. Let me just mute this. That is kind of trippy. I was hearing the conversation 20 seconds ago.
A little OBS magic or
Y-
something.
Yeah, it was it's still doing it. Hold on a second. Sorry, just a second. There we go. Okay. All right. Welcome. Well, Damien, I really appreciate you being on Cliff Chats, and you were on one of the first ones on a panel with Jason Lavasser, who's here in Nashville, and Taylor,
Yeah.
Jimbe Fola in Chicago. So it's good to have you back, and I thought there's a lot we could talk about. Damien, I know Damien from Portland, Oregon, where I lived for 17 years. Damien, I would say is the first call electric bass player in Portland and beyond. And Damien has played with the likes of Gino Vanelli for many years, I believe, Peter Erskine. Um, and who are some other people that you've played with that have been experiences that have been really notable for yourself?
Let's see. Les McCann
Uh-huh.
was very cool. Did that for a few years with Reinhardt on drums.
Yeah.
Let's see. Buddy Rich Big Band did a handful of those. Jaco Pastorius Big Band did a tour in Japan.
Nice.
Um, yeah, a handful of cool things. I keep lucking out and getting some good gigs once in a while. Well, I used to anyway.
Well, yeah, well, I don't think it's just luck, knowing how you play and knowing uh, how you are. Um, and for people who are tuning in, I will look at the comments if anyone has anything they would like to ask. Feel free to ask some questions. Um, and let me just okay. I realized that I shared it. There's the technical thing. Have you've been done some live events, I believe, as well?
Yeah, for bass education, I do a lot, and scottsbasslessons.com, I do a lot of live webinar teaching
Uh-huh.
things. With Scott's bass lessons, I'm lucky enough that he has a tech guy who can help me navigate everything and moderate everything. And but I know when you're doing it yourself, there's a lot of moving parts to keep track of, and it's hard to actually just focus on doing the event because you're always got your eye on three other things.
Definitely. Yeah, it's like I realized I shared it to my personal YouTube page as opposed to my Sound and Rhythm Drumming School page, but that's fine. Um, so so yeah, so Portland, what brought you to Portland, Oregon originally?
Um, Honestly, I kind of ran out of place. I've moved around a lot. This is my 12th or 13th state.
Oh yeah.
Um, Although I've been in Oregon since 2003, so I'm pretty well settled. But originally, do you know Matt Butler,
I don't know him personally, but I know who he is.
Everyone Orchestra?
Uh-huh.
My wife and I knew him from the Bay Area when we lived there, and he lives in Eugene. Lived, now he's in Portland.
Uh-huh.
But at the time he was in Eugene. So honestly, the idea was to move to Seattle, but we didn't know anything about the Northwest, so we kind of crashed in Eugene for a while,
Uh-huh.
hanging with him. And I just wound up meeting folks in his circle and wound up working in Portland pretty much right away. And especially at the time, Portland was a lot cheaper than Seattle. It was a lot easier to drive around and get from one side of town to the other. So we just said, let's just stay here. And we wound up buying a house, and we've been here ever since.
Yeah, it sounds like Portland embraced you.
Yeah, yeah. I really dug the vibe here. It's very supportive. I I give most of the credit for whatever abilities I have to actually play jazz specifically to having moved to Portland because it was the first environment where it felt supportive and safe enough for me to actually try and do it in front of people without
Uh-huh.
feeling like I was just, gonna ruin the gig or step on my feet, It was the first place was actually like, yeah, man, go for it. Like, let's do this thing. And, and people gently nudged me along when I needed guidance. And it was a very supportive community. So I really kind of fell in love with it. And it felt like home very quickly.
Nice. I can't believe that you've been there for 17 years now. Because I remember when you first moved to town.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I can't believe it's been that long either.
Yeah. And so you were originally a drummer, is that correct?
Yeah, back in the day. I mean, I'd always played a little bit of both, but
Uh,
drums was my first passion. And I started at Berkeley as a drummer, more of a metal drummer and hard rock drummer, but quickly felt out of place and switched my major to bass.
uh,
Still didn't really know what I was doing. So, long story short, I kind of dropped out and decided to kind of teach myself, realizing there's nothing I'd rather do than music, so I might as well keep working at it.
so how long were you actually at Berkeley?
I was there from 93 to 96.
Okay.
And then I wound up back in Boston after being on the West Coast, LA, San Francisco, and Paris for a short stint. Wound up back in Boston. So I figured, well, what a great way to meet some players. And I went back to Berkeley and actually finished my degree
Oh, cool.
after I'd already been working semi-professionally. I still had coffee shop jobs and stuff like that, but I had been gigging a lot, so I had a lot more experience. So I went back and finished the degree, and then promptly that's when I moved to Portland.
Okay. Oh, so after you finished the degree, okay. So name all the places that you've lived and about how long you lived in those places.
Oh man, let's see. Well, I was actually born in Vegas. My biological dad was the bass player for Stan Kenton Orchestra, and when I was born, he was pretty much working as a Vegas bass player.
Okay.
Um, my folks split when I was 2. My mom and I moved to San Francisco a few years. And then basically my mom decided she was sick of being a poor, starving artist. She was an actress and she went back to school. So every time she finished a 2-year degree, we'd move to a new place. We were in Oklahoma for a while, Kansas for a while, Eastern Massachusetts, a couple of different places in Massachusetts, to New Jersey, where I was in New Jersey from 4th grade until my junior year of high school.
Okay. Formative times.
Yeah, formative times. I'm basically from New Jersey,
Uh-huh.
Michigan, New York State, North Carolina, back to California, Paris. There's a few others in between there somewhere.
Where in New York State were you?
Oneonta,
Okay.
small little town. Almost started going to school there before Berkeley, and I basically spent my summer partying so hard I realized I wasn't going to get anything done.
Uh,
I quickly applied to Berkeley and just kind of decided to go to Boston on a whim.
yeah. So you had mentioned being at Berkeley. Some people I think maybe thrive with all that information and all that and that sort of environment. And some people I think it can maybe even be stifling. Did you feel like it was one or the other for you or?
Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of catching up to do because I had never played bass with other humans before.
Uh,
Aside from a couple of gigs with reading charts in a big band when I was a little kid on the boardwalk as like a sideshow thing. But I'd never really played bass. And I was very intimidated, very fear-based, so I didn't embrace any of the culture, any of the opportunities there. I also felt like it was there was a little bit of a vibe. Like you could always tell the Berkeley cats there in the back of the room at the gigs with their arms crossed, like judging everybody
yeah.
on stage. And I just didn't feel like I was anywhere near up to snuff. So I kind of hid in the shadows and just went to my classes and didn't make use of everything at my disposal there.
Uh-huh. And so you mentioned that you felt like you were fear-based. How did you, I mean, I assume that you've moved away from that. I mean, I know that can be something that can always comes back, but what are some things you did to move away from being fear-based in your approach to music or whatever you're doing?
A couple of different things happened. The first most formative thing was actually here in Portland. I was doing a jazz gig in Lake Oswego with Ramsey Embick, and I think it was Martin Zarzar on drums.
Okay.
And, we're doing the jazz thing, and we're in an Italian restaurant, like trying not to disturb people eating their chicken piccata. And I was so, like, I got to sound like a jazz guy. I've got to sound like a jazz guy. And I didn't know how to sound like a jazz guy. And I was just so hypercritical of everything I played. I was like, that note sucked. That solo was crap. I was so in my head that it was awful. And during the set break, I was sitting at the bar nursing a Coke or something, and I was just like, kind of beating myself up, and I just had this realization. I was looking around, and it was kind of a, I call it the grain of sand on the beach moment, where I realized, I'm sitting in an Italian restaurant in Lake Oswego, Oregon. Like, I never even heard of this place until, like a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody's paying attention to the band. Like, it's not that big a deal. Like, just
Mm-hmm.
have fun. If you want to do this for a living, you got to have fun doing it. Otherwise, get a job that pays better, for the love of God.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, on the second set, I just decided to stop trying to sound like anybody but myself and just have fun with the music. And lo and behold, it sounded infinitely better. Everything was better. And I do have a natural tendency to try and respect the music, so it's not like I started slapping in the middle of A Beautiful Love or something. But it was just allowing myself that freedom, and allowing myself the freedom to make mistakes and realize the world wasn't going to end, and it
Yeah.
was no big deal. So that was kind of the beginning of that. And then I had a few other moments. I used to be afraid to fly, which is ironic considering how much I've flown over the past 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
And I missed a Gospel Chops drum video opportunity in New York because I was afraid to fly, so I figured I'd take a train from Portland to New York.
That could take a while. From Portland.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we got held up in a windstorm. Long story short, again, I missed the whole thing. Like, I just wound up having to turn around and take a train back home. And I kind of decided, that was dumb. I'm never going to allow myself to let fear dictate my decision-making processes. So also fully realizing that usually when you're afraid of something, it usually means it's going to be good for you. Every mistake is an opportunity to learn. If you only stay in your comfort zone, you'll never grow.
Yeah.
And I was kind of coming to these realizations. So as soon as I decided, like, doesn't matter how scared you are, say yes and just work your butt off. Turn that fear into motivation to practice and do what you got to do to pull it together for the gig, whatever it is. And that's kind of the approach I adopted. And then you mentioned some of those, when I was naming off the other gigs I'd done.
Mm-hmm.
Each one of those was terrifying for me when I got the call. I mean, I had a full-blown panic attack when I got asked to do the Jaco Pastorius big band thing. It was like a week at the Blue Note in Tokyo with Richard Bona. Both of us, I was like, what? Who the hell got, like, they called the wrong guy.
It's understandable. Yes, for sure.
Yeah, but, every time I did one of those gigs, I did that. I turned the fear into motivation, and I practiced hard.
Mm-hmm.
And every time the gig was over, I realized, like, that was okay. Like,
It didn't kill you.
It didn't kill me. I didn't suck. Like, actually, I was so prepared that it just wound up being fun. And it slowly dawned on me that I can do this thing. And so through each one of those fear turned to elation type gig experiences I had, it slowly dawned on me that as long as I did the homework, I could do it, and as long as I was honest with myself about my weaknesses and worked on those with intention, especially as relating to any gigs I might have, that it'd be okay coming through the other side. The worst I was going to be was like adequate. And I was like, I can live with that.
Well, it's interesting also, I think, it illustrates a point of how we can perceive ourselves and how other people might perceive us totally differently. Whereas like I remember, when you moved to Portland, thinking, you just moved to Portland, but man, this guy can really play. And so from my perspective, I was like, oh man, this guy's really good player. Whereas I would have no idea that you were feeling like, oh, I don't know if I can play jazz, and I don't know if I can do this.
Yeah, no, on the inside, people have always thought, man, you seem so cool, calm, and collected. And I'm like, man, half the time I'm kind of peeing myself on the inside. Like, I guess maybe I'm so internal that on the external, I'm not really showing much of anything. But yeah, for a long time, especially the first 5 years or so in Portland, I was really nervous on a lot of those gigs, but I just kept doing the best I could. And
that's awesome. Did you practice breathing or meditation during that time at all?
I came to. Yeah, I've never been one for, sitting on the Zafu pillow and like getting into a pose and doing the thing, but I realized how important breath was when it came to anxiety and the ability to play comfortably. I realized when I was tense, I couldn't play.
Yeah.
So I kind of got into the habit of laying down on the couch before I left for the gig in like 20 minutes or so, just kind of letting my mind wander and breathing and take a little nap if I fall asleep or not. I just set an alarm and relax.
Yeah.
And it was noticeably, gigs were noticeably better and more comfortable, and I felt better. And so I became aware of how important peace of mind is to everything.
Yeah. Have you ever read Kenny Warner's Effortless Mastery?
Yeah. Probably a dozen years ago. That's a great book that emphasizes that or embodies that kind of approach.
Definitely. I've read it two or three times, and but one of the takeaways, and he's been doing some seminars on Zoom, and so I've been doing those and just kind of refreshing a lot of his ideas, it's this whole thing about not caring, and it's like, how do you not care about something that you care about? It's a interesting balance.
Yeah, it really kind of comes down to acceptance. The way I've come to frame it in my mind is such that, realizing that everybody's on a spectrum. One of my biggest issues is that I would always compare myself to the world's greatest and then just feel infinitely inadequate.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of realizations that had to happen, but one of the important ones was realizing that we're all on a spectrum. Everybody starts off knowing nothing, and we get to where we get. And for almost everybody in the world, there's always somebody ahead of you. There's always somebody behind you. You are where you are, and you just have to make peace with that fact. And as long as you have the tendency to try and always be a little bit better tomorrow than you were today, you'll always improve. You'll always be better tomorrow, and you can, rest assured that you're walking the right path with regard to your abilities, as long as you're working smart and practicing with intention.
Yeah.
So I just kind of made peace with the fact that I play like I play. I'll never be able to burn like this guy. I'll never be able to, walk a blues like Ray Brown. I'll never be able to Jocko like Jocko or whatever. And that's cool. I can do me, and I have a thing, and my thing is what I do. And if you don't like it, don't call me for the gig. But if
Exactly.
you do, and so that's at least emotionally that served me well.
Yeah, and it sounds like that way you probably more often find yourself playing with people that do have you there because they want you there, and you can be you, and you don't feel like you have to.
Yeah, because really, all anybody really wants is for you to have an authentic voice, is for you to sound like you, and you to have a voice of your own when you're speaking the language of music. And there's people can be pretty forgiving of whether or not you can blow over Donna Lee at 300 BPM or not, when you at least have an approach and you have a maturity to your playing, and you have a thing, and you're a solid bass player. I think bass players forget their role in the band sometimes. They get so hung up on chops and blazing solos, and every time you turn on YouTube, there's somebody half as young as the last guy playing twice as fast, and people get a little bit hung up on that
Drums
stuff.
as well.
Yeah, drums as well. And just really focusing on like, okay, I'm going to focus on being a good bass player.
Yeah.
And everything after that is icing on the cake.
Yeah, I can really relate to what you're saying. I think for that whole comparing thing, for myself, I had to just kind of turn off, like literally stop watching some of the stuff. Like, okay, they can do this thing, but and then just focus on really the fundamentals for me, just over and over again.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, what you're not doing when you're watching all these YouTube videos?
Practicing.
It was like, let me put all of my energy into me instead of into what everybody else is doing. And there's a time and place for that. It's great to explore transcription. You want to explore other people's vocabulary to better develop your own.
Yeah.
So there's certainly a time and a place for that. But it's whether you're doing it in a healthful way or not, or an anxiety provoking way.
Definitely. When you moved to Portland in 2003, was that the first time where you really feel like you really started to put yourself out there, or had you already really put yourself in situations where you're out
When I
there.
was in the Bay Area, um, I Boston was like an 8 month in between of here in the Bay Area. I was in the Bay Area for 4 years or so.
Uh-huh.
I was gigging a lot then,
Hmm.
but it was very low pressure type stuff, except for a literal handful of gigs. Most of it was very much like kind of jammy songwritery bands that I played in and knew the material, or
Uh-huh.
the occasional.
Bands that rehearsed,
Yeah, yeah, and I lived in a
regular.
small town north of the Golden Gate called Fairfax, and so it was it was like small community, and it wasn't like I was like in the city in the trenches freelancing with everybody.
Hmm.
For the most part, I was playing with people I knew very well in front of people I knew very well.
Yeah. Well, that can make a difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what, let's say a year ago, what was your year like last year? Like what did it look like day to day, week to week, month to month?
Well, last year I was on the road, maybe probably a solid third, if not more, of the year. So there's a lot of traveling. I was in Europe a couple of times and Asia a couple of times. I think I was in the Middle East last year as well. So it
Were
was a
you
lot of
teaching at a camp? Is that and performing, or what were you doing there?
most of my tours were performing tours,
Uh,
but I also teach for jazz education abroad. So we go to Thailand every year. I've done that every year for the past 5. This was the first year where we didn't get to do that. That was my
mhm.
first cancellation for COVID. That was in mid-February.
Oh man.
Of course, it hit Asia first, so
Yeah.
that was the first cancellation. But yeah, we go to Thailand, Beirut, Cyprus, and used to go to Shanghai every year.
Hmm.
So that was yeah.
Is that with the same people or different people?
Generally the same people. There's a group of Americans that are scattered all over the world that teach for jazz education abroad, and they also draw from local instructors as
Uh,
well.
and was that the sort of gig that was an opportunity that you saw and went for, or was it something that came your way?
That fell in my lap. I met Gene Aiken, who is he's the head honcho and the brainchild behind it. I met him playing an international drum festival in Beijing, I think it was,
Uh-huh.
with Peter. And right after that, whoever had been teaching before me, I believe she was a professor at a school in Michigan, had an accident folding up bleachers and really did some damage on a few of her fingers. So I
Hmm.
subbed for her, kind of a one-off thing. Gene just called me and asked if I wanted to do it, and I was like, "Yeah, let's do it." Subbed for her, and then it turned out the damage was a little more permanent, and he just asked if I wanted to keep doing it, and so I kept doing it.
Nice to have nice reoccurring gigs like that. That's
Yeah, and it was such a good experience for me because I've always taught a little bit, but these were the first time I had taught groups, and the first time I had taught more than just bass lessons. I was giving improv classes and master classes every day and leading combos. It really helped me to figure out how to teach, and also teaching people of different levels and mixed level groups was as a whole. It was a steep learning curve.
yeah.
It really helped me to dial a lot of things together. Plus, we got to play faculty concerts every night. So it was a lot of playing with a lot of great players and instructors, and there's always special guests. So I got to play with, Antonio Hart and like people like that who would be artists in residence for
That's
those weeks. So
awesome.
it was very cool.
And so how would you balance your schedule when, before COVID, as far as, taking local gigs, but also if something like that came up, how would you deal with that?
Well, I try and respect the first come first serve rule with scheduling because nothing stresses band leaders out more than knowing that the bass player tends to sub the gig out if he gets a better offer.
Hmm.
So I try, even if I get a better paying gig offer, I try not to do that too much. Thankfully, things like tours with Gino Vanelli or anybody tend to get booked so far in advance that there's not issues with that so
Uh-huh.
much. But yeah, when I'm home pre-COVID, I was gigging 3 to 5 nights a week, generally speaking, anyway. So I would definitely try and adopt the first come first serve thing, you know, unless it was a $20 gig and somebody called me for $1,000 gig, then I'd just be like, man, I gotta take it. Like,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you know, and I'd find a sub
And
myself, and they,
you think they'd understand if it was a $20 gig?
yeah, you know, unless it was something that was just so out of whack that they couldn't help but understand. But even still, I would always make sure I'd find a good sub, not just any old schmo with a bass, but find somebody who, you know, could steal the gig from me if they really wanted to. You know, I always wanted to leave the band leader 100% happy if I had to do something like that.
Yeah. So, uh, with like Gino Vanelli, what is that gig like as far as like what did the preparation look like? What you know, how much of it is really parts are really fixed? How much of it is improvised? That sort of thing.
Um, at first, I've been touring with him for 10 years. I first worked with him in 2009. So initially, everything was pretty fixed for me until I got to know Gino and got to get a sense of where I could kind of do my own thing and really get to understand what he wanted out of the tunes. And now it's a little bit of my own thing with his specific lines, but he arranges things pretty intensely. A lot of unison lines, a lot of hits. So there's not a whole lot of wiggle room
Uh-huh.
in there. The preparation was me. I've got the memory of a goldfish. I am so bad at memorizing material. I read every gig, even still. Um, so with Gino, I wanted to memorize as much as possible. So it was just a lot of repetition, especially before those first few tours. I would just be looping the set over and over and over again. It drove my wife crazy. It was before I had a dedicated space, and I would just be in
Uh-huh.
the living room, like blasting Gino Vanelli and playing along for hours. Now I have a little bit of a cheat sheet that I keep on my iPad, kind of low and away. So if there's any specific thing I need to look at, there it is. I have most of the set memorized at this point. He's always changing things. Gino's kind of a workaholic, and he does all of his own arrangements. He does everything.
Uh-huh.
So he's always adding sections to tunes or rearranging tunes or adding new tunes to the set. He gets bored. He doesn't want to just do the same thing all the time. So
Yeah.
it keeps it interesting. And the band is smoking. It's a great band.
Yeah, Reinhardt on drums.
Reinhardt on drums, and yeah, Greg Goebel, Jay Coder, Patrick Lamb, and then we always get a couple of local horn players in every city to fill out the round out the horn section.
How did it become a Portland band? You know, the core.
Well, Gino's wife, Trisha, who he's been married to since the 80s, is from here.
Okay.
And they moved here some 25 years ago.
Okay, I didn't realize that so they live there.
Yeah, so he lives in Corbett, just outside of Troutdale. And
Yeah.
yeah, so he, you know, for a while there was some guys in LA in the band, but he always wanted a Portland band. So, you know, when came to rehearsals, he didn't have to fly somebody in and put him up in a hotel or something. You know, he just wanted to be able to say, okay, rehearsal this date, and everybody drives there, and we're good. So yeah, so it's been all Portland band since right before I joined.
Okay. Yeah. And so are you a charter? Is that typically what you'll do for gigs? You'll chart out all the tunes?
Yeah, pretty much.
Uh,
Yeah, yeah. Actually, just this morning I was charting out. I'm playing a Black Music Expo with Arietta Ward and Tyrone Hendricks
uh,
in a week and a half or so, and I was transcribing a bunch of Tyrone's tunes. And yeah, I always make myself charts. I kind of have my own shorthand,
uh-huh.
but I do tend to default to actual like lead sheet style charts.
Okay. Do you have a chart nearby that you could hold up?
One of my shorthand charts.
Sure.
Let's see. Um,
Also, have you ever delved into the national number system?
I've learned it enough to read it, because certain songwriters I've done sessions with have used it,
Yeah.
but not for my own usage.
Uh,
Actually, lately I got into on the iPad here with the Apple Pencil
uh-huh.
annotating. Let's see if you can see.
Yeah.
Just-
That's cool. Okay, I think I need to invest in the pencil.
So actually, I just keep a blank staff paper as a template here, and then
Okay.
actually, you know, if there's not too much going on, I don't want it to get ugly. But if it's just two sections and a quick bass line, I've used it on the road to chart out, like sketch out new tunes somebody wants to do.
Yeah. Do you then put it in like Fourscore, or what do you where do you do
Well, if I
with it?
do it for this, like these tunes, I'll just do it like this. Um, but generally speaking, I'll put things. Oh yeah, sorry, I was trying to do things and talk at the same time. I'm like in one track. Yeah, Fourscore on the iPad for sure.
Uh,
Um, but yeah, and then generally speaking, I'll do like just regular straight up
okay. What
chart
do you
tunes.
what software do you use to do that?
I was a Sibelius guy, um, but once Avid bought Sibelius, they stopped really updating the program that much. So I felt like it was going to get antiquated pretty quickly, especially if you upgrade your OS or something. And I wound up on a recommendation of John Nastos, who's not only a phenomenal musician but a phenomenal tech guru, switching to Dorico.
Okay, I haven't heard of that one.
Yeah, Steinberg owns Dorico. Steinberg, they did a smart thing. When Avid came and bought Sibelius, they kind of just canned all the Sibelius people.
Huh.
And what Steinberg did was hire all of those Sibelius people and said, "Don't worry about no deadline, within reason, no budget limit. Just build the software you always wished you had been working on."
Hmm.
And they came up with Dorico, and it's pretty fantastic. And there is a little bit of a learning curve. It has its own functioning system, but it's so well considered. And YouTube, they've really put a lot of energy into having great tutorials and how-tos on YouTube. So anytime you can't figure out how to do something, it's right there for you to check it out, and then bam, you're off to the races.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, Dorico is very cool.
Nice. I'll check that out. And so once COVID hit and people started staying home and the gigs started to get canceled,
Yeah.
and so that's when you decided to focus on the educational site. Is that correct?
Yeah, I had that panic attack. I woke up one day to two canceled tours and like a dozen local canceled gigs, and then it wasn't long before everybody in my calendar started saying, "Looks, might not happen."
Yeah.
So yeah, the first thing I did was I realized I needed to start getting my video and editing chops together because I'd be teaching more. I've had a few things on the back burner in the back of my mind for years that I just never had time to do.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, let's start there. So I immediately bought a Final Cut Pro tutorial
Uh-huh.
and
So you
simultaneously.
already had Final Cut Pro, but you hadn't really messed with it too much, or
Yeah, I had it, but I really just didn't know what I was doing with it.
yeah. And that's video editing software for anyone who's not familiar.
Yeah. And so I immediately started filming a instructional DVD type thing, instructional video to go along with one of my books, Right Hand Drive, which is a technical technique book.
Hmm.
And I always figured this would be better if I could show you than tell you about it type of thing.
Yeah.
So that was the first thing I did. I did a 2-hour video for that, started selling that through my website. And then, for over a dozen years, I've thought about doing an online educational site. And it always just seemed so daunting, like so much work. And there's already so many good sites out there. I just never really started it.
Hmm.
And I figured, well, I'm unemployed. I'm learning how to edit video. Even if it just winds up being something my existing students use and maybe a couple of other people, it'll be worth it. It'll be
Hmm.
a great thing to have a repository for all of my educational materials. And I realized that it'll just keep growing if I keep doing it. So why not?
Yeah.
So I poured everything into that, starting mid-March. And by May 5th, I launched baseeducation.com, and it's been really growing really nicely. And
That's
that's pretty
awesome.
much been my full-time job.
That's awesome. I mean, and that was really proactive of you. I think that, it seems like people who have used this time to do something productive, there are some fruits to that labor. And I think you're a great example of that. I still need to check it out more. I've started to, and I got distracted, but I'm going to check out your site more and spend some time on it.
No
Maybe pick up
sweat.
the bass. I do have a P bass. So, uh,
The one thing that's been really nice about it is I had a handful of goals with it. Um, One was I wanted it to be hyper affordable because I've traveled so much and worked with students in different countries. I realize not everybody has the resources to pay $25 a month
Yeah.
for something like that. But they also don't have anybody locally who can help. They're just stuck. They're by themselves just surfing YouTube, which is this massive ball of information that if you don't have somebody to help direct you with your studies can be overwhelming.
Definitely. It can be counterproductive.
It can be counterproductive.
Yeah.
And the other thing was I wanted to be accessible to people who wanted me to be involved in their learning process. So I wanted a place where, because I always wished I had somebody I could just call up and be like, hey, altered chord, like what does that mean? What should I do? Especially
Okay, explain it, please.
altered chords?
Yes. Can you explain it with, I mean, I know without the bass, maybe it's tricky.
Of course, I had to pick altered chords. Well, there's so many. What's interesting about altered chords is there's so many different ways you can approach playing them that all of the notes are technically available to you. It's just a matter of context. My two favorite ways to play over altered chords. One is what I call the Octatonic Scale, an 8-note scale, where you can play the root, a half step up, which is the flat 9, and it's an alternating pattern of half steps and whole steps. So I actually do have a bass here.
Okay.
And what's neat about this approach is especially handy for asymmetrical instruments like pianos and horn players, where something in the A major scale is a completely different shape than a C major scale type of instruments. Because, and I'll get to it, this scale works over so many different chord types, but it's nice on a symmetrical instrument like the bass because you come up with this pattern of half step, whole step, half step, and then you get this two half steps separated by a whole step that move diagonally across the fretboard. So it's a nice symmetrical shape, which is nice, easy to map out on the fretboard. But what's cool about it, and the way I prefer to see it, is you wind up with thinking over an altered chord, like this is an A7. You get the root, the flat 9, and then chromatic approach tones into all of the dominant chord tones. Sharp 9 is a chromatic approach into the 3, sharp 11 is a chromatic approach into the 5, 13 is a chromatic approach into the flat 7. So if you're comfortable with your A7 arpeggio, really easy to remember: root, flat 9, then chromatic approach into the chord tones.
Okay, you're starting to fry my mind, but I can sort of following. That's great.
And then the other preferred way to play through altered chords is a 7th mode melodic minor. So basically, if you're at A7 altered, you can play as if you're in B flat melodic minor,
Okay.
which is a major scale with a flat 3. So B flat major scale with a flat 3. Same notes from A, and you're playing the A altered scale.
Okay. Cool. Thanks for
That's
illustrating.
one of the more complicated. That is not a bass playing 101 type of question, and that's one of the more complicated chord types to get into.
And so creating your site, do you cater to a certain level of bass player?
I very intentionally made sure to put a lot of assume nothing, nuts and bolts, here's from the beginning type lessons in there. Definitely my teaching experience is primarily with intermediate to advanced students. It's mostly college age and professional touring musicians who come through town and want to hit a quick lesson on a day off. So, maybe 3/5 or so, or maybe even 4/5, 2/3, we'll say, of the material is that. But with every video, I always start at the beginning because that's how I feel is the best way to learn. To start at the very beginning of something and slowly build up your layers of complexity until you find that breaking point, and then kind of maybe back off.
So giving different levels, like if you're at this level, this is what you can do, and then here's another step, sort of like that.
Yeah, so I always start off with just very, very simple concepts and then show how you can then develop those concepts into the more complicated stuff. So I have all levels of students in there. And I've also started what I've called the Bass Education Mentorship program, where a very limited number of people have biweekly lessons with me, as well as constant contact through a video app, and so there's a lot of interaction. I have a community in there as well, so there's people always asking questions about lessons, and I shoot them information back. I mainly wanted to be a resource for people, as accessible as humanly possible, and so I think people have really resonated with the site. It's been really well received. People dig it.
That's awesome. And so what has it been like? You mentioned that you started to do some live gigs and some streaming gigs. What has that been like, and how have you approached that?
For the most part, it's been cool. My first couple of streaming gigs were up in Seattle with Tarek Abuzaid, and I did one with Scarrick, and I did one with Happy Orchestra with Tarek. And those were cool. They took all the precautions, forehead temperature, social distance. Everybody had space in the green room with like a 10-foot radius. So it was very
Wearing
comfortable.
masks or?
Yeah, wearing masks.
Uh-huh.
Very cool. I did a couple here in Portland that were less cool, and I decided not to do them anymore. Like sound men pulling down their mic and testing the mic for the singer, and I'm like, oh, what are you doing?
Yeah, I did my first gig in 6 months this last weekend, and the bass player and I were the only ones wearing masks.
Yeah.
We'd rehearsed outside, and it was outside, but the sound men weren't wearing masks, so it was kind of like, yeah, I don't
Yeah,
know.
and if you're gonna not wear a mask, at least stay the hell away from me.
Yeah, yeah.
I've been doing a handful of pop-up gigs in parks with some local guys, a band called Outer Orbit.
Uh,
Those have been great. We just set up distanced. Peter Knutson, guitarist in Ghost Note, he's one of the guys. He brings his generator, and we've just been plugging and playing, and those are really well received because people are so hungry for music, and everybody just spaces out in the park.
People are respectful and really enjoying it, sounds like.
Yeah, it's been a very good scene. And I've done a couple, like the Cathedral Park Jazz Festival streaming gig, and for the most part, things have been very cool. Everybody wearing their mask and trying to be as distanced as possible.
Yeah.
And that's kind of been. I made it a rule that I'm not doing any indoor club dates with audiences.
Yeah.
And so I've turned down a lot of that work because I just don't feel good about it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Indoor
understandable.
streaming with a skeleton crew, with precautions being taken, or outdoor spaced gigs.
So if you get offered a gig, do you clarify to make sure that those are in place?
Yeah, absolutely. That's my first question.
Yeah. That's good.
And everybody's understood when I say, sorry, I'm just not doing, even if it's only 20% capacity in a theater, like I just don't want to be in the same room with circulated air as 100 other people. So sorry.
Yeah, that's understandable. I feel the same. Well, so let's say, a year, 2 years from now, what would you like work and life to look like?
Well, the first couple of months, I was actually actually pretty happy for the break from traveling and gigging, because I was starting to hit burnout between all of the traveling and then gigging so much when I was home, and then still continuing to teach privately, teach at Portland State. Just everything I had going on, it was getting to feel like I was a little beat up. And so I was a little happy for the break. Now I've been kind of chomping at the bit a little bit, and I do miss touring and some of the projects I have going. So I'm hoping that my life in 2 years from now is a balance of that plus what I have going on. Because I love the bass education thing and the interaction with the students there. And it feels good to be of service, and it feels like it's been a good service for people. So I'd like to keep that going. So if I could find a balance between that and some good quality touring gigs and good quality local gigs, kind of what do you call it? Trimming the fat a little bit. Maybe doing less gigs for gigs' sake.
Mm-hmm.
Very more particular about what gigs I do, but then continuing to foster the educational side of things.
Yeah. And so your uncle, Peter Erskine, early on in different stages of life, what influence has he had on you? Did he inspire you to be a musician, or what influence has he had on you?
Well, early on, I hated jazz. So I saw him play a lot. Like Weather Report was my first concert. And I saw them a bunch of times, saw him play with Bass Desires, with, Abercrombie, with Jocko at 7th Avenue South, which is an old club the Brecker brothers used to own in the Village.
Mm.
My grandfather would drive me up to New York and we'd watch those guys play all the time. So I got exposed to a lot of that music. I never liked the music. What I liked was the hang.
Uh-huh.
I was kind of really impressed with, one, how cool all these guys were. Two, how I just didn't understand how they could just get together and start playing and not read music or anything and just know all this stuff and be able to interact. But I was mostly inspired by watching Peter work. He's the consummate professional, and that actually wound up making more of an impression on me than anything. Like I just kind of grew up thinking I want to be like Peter, just in how he is in group situations. He's always casual, always relaxed, but he's got a joke and he's like hanging, and he's just like such a good hang, but always very professional. And if any situation came up, he always knew exactly how to deal with it. So I kind of took that away more than anything. Growing up, Peter was Uncle Pete. He was there for Christmas, and we'd pop into the city to see him play once in a while. But it wasn't like I was taking notes or thinking about being that kind of musician.
Uh-huh.
I always knew I wanted to play, but I never thought I would live in his world, the freelance professional world. I just assumed I'd hook up with a band and maybe hit the road or something, down the line. And I never actually played with him until 2009.
Okay.
That's when we did our first tour together, which I was surprised he called me for. We were, musically speaking, we were more so back then, kind of in divergent worlds.
Uh-huh.
He was, more ECM, doing more sensitive trio stuff, very artistic. I never considered myself an art musician. I was just a groove guy who could take a few jazz gigs here and there.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, getting to play with him was one of the very monumental thing for me.
Yeah. What are some things that maybe surprised you or struck you when you started to play with your uncle?
Well, one, I was made hyper aware of, I call it the art of reduction.
Mm-hmm.
Not coming out guns blazing with everything you got right out of the gate. Serving the song and listening to the song. And he really taught me how to actively listen while I'm playing and not, strive for giving the song nothing more and nothing less than it wants. And listening to the music and being the music while you're playing. Yeah, that was probably what struck me more than anything, because especially the first couple of rehearsals, I was just thinking, I got to show Uncle Pete what I can do. Like he's used to playing with Jocko and all these folks, and he's played with everybody, so I can't just sound like some sucker up here. Like I don't know. And so I was trying so hard to impress him that he just kept stopping me and be like, just pull it back, just listen.
Uh-huh.
He might sing me a simple little bass line. I'd be like, okay, he doesn't care about that. What he cares about is the music being respected. And that was an important lesson for me, and one I've tried to carry on every gig since then. Nice.
Yeah, I saw you guys play at Jimmy Mac's, and that was apparent. I mean, I think I've seen your uncle play a number of times, but I could really, it was apparent just how you all were really respecting the song. And
yeah. I never listened so hard as when I'm on a gig with Peter.
He demands that of you, I'm sure.
Yeah, and it took me a long time. It took me a couple of years. Since then we've maybe toured once or twice a year for some project or another.
Uh-huh.
And it took me a few years before I stopped worrying about impressing, because I had this double whammy. Like I was playing with Peter Erskine, the famous jazz drummer, and I wanted him to think I was good.
Mm-hmm.
But I also didn't want to disappoint Uncle Pete.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted him to walk away with a smile on his face, thinking, "Yeah, that was cool. Right on, good job." So I felt pressure from two different directions, and it took me a couple of years to kind of get over that and just put all of my energy into the music and not worry about impressing anybody but myself. With my ability to play the music.
Do you think there's any sort of innate connection being blood relatives?
No, but I think there is certainly influence. I don't think blood comes into play, but culture and environment certainly does.
Mm-hmm.
More than nurture side of things than the nature side of things. Because, like I said, my biological dad was a bass player, a professional bass player. My grandfather, who was a big influence, he was kind of my father figure growing up. He was a bass player who was semi-pro. He paid his way through medical school by starting a big band and playing bass in that.
Uh-huh.
He was very music oriented. And then Peter. So I was always surrounded by music. I'm sure that had a big impact on me.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you'd mentioned the hang, and, it's funny, when I moved to Nashville, that's like the first thing people talk about is like the hang's more important than the guy with amazing musicianship or the guy with really good musicianship. Take the hang of the person who's not quite as heavy a musician.
Yeah, and that's certainly true. Studio and touring gigs, especially, they're intimate experiences. You're spending a lot of time with people in small spaces. And it is way more important to me, and I think most everybody that lives in that world, that the environment is comfortable and good and positive and happy, than it is that, wow, they can really play fast, or they can solo, like crazy. But they're kind of an ass. Like, well, at least he can solo great. No, it's always like, no, this guy's great. Like, people would always rather have the B+ player who's awesome to hang out with than the A-list player who's a total drag and just stresses everybody out.
And the B+ player could become the A player too.
Yeah, and they usually will because they're getting all the experience. I think that's one thing that worked in my favor, is it's just a part of my personality, but I think it was also innately because I felt like I was unqualified to play bass for so long. But I've always been very, tried to be socially aware and helpful to people, so like I always want to be early to the gig, have all of my stuff prepared and ready, all of my gear works. But also, when the drummer showed up second, help them unload their drums, like just, be helpful, be of service. Peter's older than I am. When we're on the road and he has a heavy suitcase, I usually grab his suitcase when there's a flight of stairs or something, just like help people out. And it's not like I'm doing it intentionally, like, oh, I'm going to get some brownie points. But if you're just that guy who's helpful, helps pack the van, and you're, low stress, you're not flipping out whenever the meal isn't ready for the band dinner before a set or something, taking everything in stride. Traveling, things happen, flights get canceled. Don't lose your mind. Don't start yelling at people. As long as you're that guy, it goes a long way towards people's tendency to want to work with you more.
Yeah. Speaking of traveling and gigging, especially out of town gigs, what are some travel hacks you've learned over the years?
Well, hotel hacks, don't spread out. I keep all of my stuff. I have little piles, clothes here, everything I need before I'm walking out the door tomorrow morning, my keys, my wallet, my phone, my everything's right here.
So you stay organized in the hotel room.
I stay organized in the hotel room. I tend to pack light these days, as little as possible, but trying to always have an extra pair of underwear and toothbrush and stuff in your carry-on bag just in case your luggage gets lost, because that's going to happen. Yeah, boy, my chops are rusty, man. I haven't taken a flight in like 6 or 7 months, so I don't even know. It was funny. The first time I had an actual gig after COVID hit.
Yeah.
I was standing there at my car, like, it was so out of practice for me. I was like, had to really think through, like, what do I need for this? Whereas I can't remember the last time I had to think about what I needed for a gig. I just had my kit, my stuff by the door, and I grab it on the way out and load the rig and go.
There's a few other factors now too. Mask, hand sanitizer, maybe, stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I remember I got to this gig. It was at a campground like an hour or so out of Nashville, and I couldn't find my mask. And finally, I was sitting on it basically, but I was like, oh man, I need my mask. Like the one thing not to forget would be that probably.
I learned to stop keeping my mask in my phone pocket when I have to, if I have to stick it in my pocket for a while or while I'm driving or something. I've lost so many masks pulling my phone out of my pocket to check something.
Oh yeah.
So
that makes sense.
Now I have the longer band around my mask, so I just wear it around my neck the entire time.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So my wife and I have been watching your cousin's show, Pen 15. Have you watched all of those?
I have not. I don't have Hulu.
Oh, I think you get like a free trial or whatever and
Yeah,
binge watch it.
I don't really do TV. I feel like an
Oh,
ass.
oh, it doesn't make you ask. An ass.
I know she's awesome. I have no doubt that it's hilarious. Last
It's really well done.
last time I saw her was a Christmas, December,
Uh-huh.
around Christmas, and I felt like a dummy. I was like the only one there who hadn't seen her show, but no, she's great. Her and Anna worked their butts off on that thing, and yeah, I'm so proud of Maya. She's done a lot, and she's done a handful of movies.
Uh,
Really doing great.
it's interesting in the show, her dad, Peter Erskine he's a working drummer, but quite as, I don't think he's like a world famous jazz drummer. I think he's more like a working
Yeah,
guy who's gone a lot.
I think Maya said her dad in the show plays in a Steely Dan cover band or something
Oh,
like
that's right. Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. I just think it's interesting to see how someone takes real life and then, will create a show off of that.
Yeah, well, that's that makes better connection to the story. I mean, her mom in Pen 15 is her mom. It's my
Yeah.
aunt Mutsuko, and yeah, and her name's Maya. I think they stayed as close to real life as they possibly could.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you joining me for Cliff Chats. And I want to let people know about the upcoming ones. So I'm just going to pull up my calendar real quick. Next week is a drum circle facilitator chat. And the following week is, so that's October 9th at 4 p.m. Central Time. Then October 16th. Damon, do you know who Jonathan Scales is? Steel pan player?
Oh yeah, I met him when he came through town. They stayed at Peter Knutsen's place and hung out a bit. And his bass player, Elon, is incredible, and
Yeah.
Jonathan Scales is incredible, and his drummer. That's such a good group. Are you hanging with him?
Yeah, he's gonna be on at 6 p. I believe it's actually 6 p.m. East Coast time, so 5 p.m. Central. Then
Everybody,
the following week is the October 23rd is Ari Honig.
man,
Yeah, I'm excited.
you're not slacking. You're not slacking at all.
I'm pretty. It's interesting. Some of these, a few have been proposed to me. I had Kenny Warner on, and Vivian, who works with him a lot. She then said, "Hey, I have some people," and Ari was one of those people. I think he'd like to do this, and so he's going to do it on the 23rd. Then J.D. Walter, who's a great vocalist out of New York, will be the following week, and then Reza Bazi is November 6th.
Man, he's a great guitarist.
And then tentatively Herlin Riley
Man,
the next week, who is one of my favorite all-time drummers. I called him the other day and he agreed to do it, and I was like shaking talking to him like
yeah.
that's
Cliff
how.
cats don't play, man. You got some heavyweights coming in.
Yeah. So anyway, I hope people can tune in, and I really appreciate having you on here, and I consider you to be a heavyweight too, and a good person, which I think is even more important than that. And I think probably just about everybody at that sort of level, it seems like in general, I know there's exceptions, are good people.
I'd agree. I'm always surprised, especially when I meet my heroes and they're like just the nicest person.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, people sometimes say like don't meet your heroes but I haven't had that experience yet, luckily,
Yeah.
where they were not nice or something like that. Though I'm not gonna say the name. There is a famous jazz drummer who I saw at the Blue Note in New York, and he just wanted to get out of there, I'm sure. But his drums sounded amazing, and afterwards I asked him how he got his drums to sound good, and his answer was very carefully, and as he went to the green room or whatever.
Yeah.
But I mean that doesn't really mean anything. But anyways, thank you so much, and hope we can stay in touch. I know we're connected on Facebook and all that. People tuning in, check out Damian's bass education website. Even if you're not a bass player, I'm sure you can learn some things. And also, I'm sure Damian could do some sessions if you're looking for some bass on your album. So check him out, Damian Erskine. The website, what is it, basseducation.com?
Yeah, basseducation.com and damianerskine.com. And actually, I do have a handful of non-bassists that are active members on this site, and it's interesting to dialogue with, like there's an organist, there's a
Ah,
guitar player, there's a drummer even. It's interesting to dialogue with these guys and get a different perspective.
that's great. Well, as a drummer, I always, wanted to connect with bass players, and even I believe I took some lessons from bass players just to get that perspective. Like, what are you looking for from the drummer? And that's something we could talk about another time because I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts about playing with different drummers and what you look for.
Yeah.
Um, well, have a good weekend and good luck with those upcoming gigs and your bass education site.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate it. Great talking to you as always.
Yeah, thank you. All right, talk to you later.
All right, see you, Cliff.